koutou katoa, and welcome everyone to Rosterfy's second webinar of our Aotearoa New Zealand Lunch and Learn series in partnership with Aotearoa Volunteering New Zealand. My name is Kelsey, and with this series we intend to support you all with the amazing mahi that you do by inviting along thought leaders in the volunteering space to have insightful kōrero over your lunch break. And I am super excited today to be joined by Nate Whitfield. So Nate is a champion for young people in Aotearoa and a passionate advocate for community health. Currently working as a fundraising specialist for Hato St. John, while supporting St. John International as an international youth advisor, he's an acting member for Multi-Ethnic Young Leaders New Zealand, a board member for Aotearoa Volunteering New Zealand, and a previous advisory group member for the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet. Phew. Amazing, Nate. Where do you find time?
I don't. I'm running out.
It has to be one of the impressive...
I can't see anyone, but I'm sure there are people there, and it's great that you've joined us today.
One of the most impressive introductions I've done. Is there anything at all that I've missed, Nate, before we kind of kick things off?
Oh, I won't bore you with the details.
Amazing. So just quickly before we kick things off, for those of you that aren't aware of Rosterfy, we've been around for 8 years now, and we're used by over 3 million volunteers and staff worldwide. We've recently ticked over 100 million hours of volunteering powered by Rosterfy across 35 different countries, and we are all about connecting communities to events and causes that they are passionate about. So on the screen, hopefully in a couple of seconds, there'll be a quick sample of some of the customers we work with worldwide, supporting them with their volunteering experience end to end. And the fact that we are so highly configurable is our point of difference and makes us super effective at supporting our partners and cutting down on manual processes and spreadsheets so that they can focus on scaling and better connecting with their communities. Now, at the very end, I'll flash up a QR code that you can scan to learn more. But I think because we've got quite short on time here, let's kick off the discussion. And a quick bit of housekeeping as well. There's a questions box at the top right-hand side. So please drop in any questions in there for Nate as we go. And we'll try answer as we go. Otherwise, we'll hold a bit of a Q&A session at the end. So Nate, where do we begin? I suppose that what first sparked your passion for community impact and volunteerism?
Good question. Yeah, well, again, kia ora tātou katoa, kia koutou kua hui mai nei. As I say, I can't see you, but I think there's some people I know on the line, so kia ora. Thanks for joining, if you're there. What sparked my passion? I think I've got a couple of stories. I always have stories. One
Amazing.
Goes back to the context in which I've grown up. And I think that's important for our audience today are all New Zealanders, right? Am I correct in saying that?
Maybe
no Australians.
Maybe a few Aussies. Yeah.
Hello to our Australian neighbours. I think, and hopefully what I'm about to say applies for Australia as well, but I think in the New Zealand context, volunteering is kind of at the heart of so many of our communities. I grew up... and what we know is that 53%, I think it is off the top of my head, of New Zealanders volunteer right now. And that only happens because we've got that embedded into our culture and who we are here. I think back to, growing up, informal volunteering was such a big part of my childhood. So, and the people I looked up to were... had volunteer roles, whether I knew it or not, or whether I appreciated it or not, and that's part of belonging to the community in which I grew up. So I think back to, on the school sports field, there you're surrounded by people who are giving their time and they're not actually being paid to be there most of the time. And, I remember playing rugby as a younger kid. To be honest, I was never the hugest fan of it, but even after I stepped away from playing rugby, my brother continued, and I'd go to the occasional game, and you'd get to hang out with other people there who I wouldn't call this volunteering, but were there to support, right? The other supporters, and there's almost a community there that you build just from being there as part of a volunteer-led space. children's sport is huge here, and I know it is from my cousins in Australia too. So yeah, and I think also to our coaches and managers of those teams, they're volunteers. So from a young age, lots of kids here do sport, or are
Mhm.
involved in music and the arts and that sort of thing. I in intermediate school had St John in schools come in and do a first aid session with my class. That was
Mhm.
where I sort of was taken by St John and the life saving work that our organisation does.
Yeah.
So I decided I wanted to be an ambulance officer, and so I started to do whatever I could to pursue that path. And it was recommended I join our youth program here. Um, how that changed my life, it really did. The
Mhm.
community that you build there also um, is huge. So I think right from that young age, there's family involvement, and then you find and you a community, I suppose, of your own, and everyone has this sense of belonging in that community
Mhm.
right from a really young age. And it goes on, and I work now with people who've been in for example, with St John for 50 plus years. One of my good
Mhm.
friends who I volunteer with has done 53 years with this organisation. So and
Wow.
joined as a kid, right? So there's this awesome legacy of service that happens here, and some of it informal, and some of it more formal through marae, through sports,
Mhm.
through Hato St John, and all sorts of organisations in between. So I think it's embedded in who we are. That's why I've got this passion for being involved in giving back. Yeah.
Yeah, it just shows how important it is to sort of pave the way for that younger generation always, right? Really showing up in the way that you can and how much of an influence that can really be on those that come after.
Absolutely, and I think that's how we can secure the next generation of volunteers, right? By getting
Yeah,
them involved now. That's the
yeah,
only way to do it. Yeah.
absolutely. In your role at Volunteering New Zealand, what are some key trends or shifts you're seeing in how people want to engage with volunteering, especially that younger demographic we're speaking about, but also more multicultural communities that we see obviously in across New Zealand?
Yeah, this is important to consider, right? Because when we're talking about how the sector continues to grow but continues to remain relevant, we have to kind of pivot to where people are. We have to meet them where they're at, we always say.
Mhm.
Um, I suppose if we talk about where people volunteer, that might be a helpful way to frame it,
Yeah.
because there's a lot of research around the urban centres and the rural communities, and if we split sort of all of our people in this country into those two sort of categories, broadly speaking, um,
Mhm.
what we know, and um, I was really taken by some research from Professor Paul Spoonley of Massey University, who
Mhm.
presented at one of our conferences a couple of years ago, and I still have some of his numbers floating around in my head because there's some really interesting research out there. Um, we know that in the urban centres, so places like Auckland, um,
Mhm.
population is growing exponentially. We're seeing more and more people migrating into places like Auckland, and that means that the population's booming here, right? We can't keep up with the development needed, and it also means that there's this rise in, I think it's a sociological term, super diversity. So what
Mhm.
we're seeing is a booming population and an increasingly more diverse population. Now
Yeah.
that's I'll put that to the side for now, but I think that's really important to consider, obviously, when
Mhm.
we're talking about urban centres. And then in the rural areas, and I've got lots of whānau. I'm from a rural area. I've got lots of family and friends and colleagues who work and live in rural areas. And in their spaces, the population is aging. So where in the urban centres it's younger and more diverse, in rural areas we're seeing an aging population.
Mhm.
Increasingly, that means we have to respond to things like isolation and remoteness,
Mhm.
connectivity issues, and so I suppose belonging looks different rurally to in an urban space. So I think
Absolutely.
in terms of how people want to engage, sometimes it's not personal choice. It's kind of dictated by where they are and therefore how they have to access volunteering. Um, in the urban centres, we're seeing people, an increase in short-term or episodic volunteering that aligns with the busy schedule that comes with urban life. Um,
Mhm.
so yeah, project-based volunteering as well. people looking to use professional skills and offer them in a volunteer capacity, maybe through mentoring and that sort of thing. That,
Hmm.
in my view, and according to some of the research, is becoming more prevalent in the urban space.
Yeah.
Rural, in terms of access and belonging, that's, I think, an ongoing challenge. And what we know is that historically, and in our regional state of volunteering report, you can read it online. Shell just got a shout out there. Um, we know that rural areas are like the hub of volunteering, and everyone is involved in everything.
Hmm.
I think some of our rural places where we've got people who volunteer as ambulance officers with St John, who also head up their local area committees for St John. They're also the fire and emergency, volunteer firefighter, and the mayor of the town. People
Yeah.
have all diverse involvement in rural communities. So I guess what we're seeing is trends that emerge from the way demographies are changing, demographics of our communities are changing. So it's not a coincidence, and a lot of it's not down to personal choice. It's
Hmm.
actually because the world is changing, the way that where people live, how people live, and who they are and where they are. That's all changing. So I guess we can talk more about young people and the multicultural communities, but yeah, it's
Yeah.
all down to yeah.
So speaking about that younger demographic, um, in your experience, what is just the best way to attract them? If we keep the question really simple, what's just the best way do you think to attract that younger demographic coming through? Other than obviously we've spoken about paving the way by showing up and volunteering yourself and being that sort of
Mm.
that legacy that they can look up to. But how else would you recommend that an organisation looks to start attracting a younger demographic of volunteers?
It's kind of, although you simplified it there a little bit, Kelsey,
Yeah.
it's kind of still a loaded question, right? Because it's going to be
Yeah.
different for each organisation. I mean, broadly speaking, though, there's a few things that I'd recommend people think about. I think first of all, it's the nature of the volunteering.
Yeah.
What do you actually want the young people to do? And sometimes people want to get young people involved because that they are interested in getting the voice of young people around a table.
Mhm.
Now, that's cool, and we could talk for hours about that, probably about what that looks like and how to do that best. Um, but it's important that you think about the why. Always start
Mhm.
with the why, and I always come back to why are we actually here, why we're doing this. And so for some organisations, it might be that, and in some contexts, it might be that co-designing uh, the model is the most appropriate way or the best way to approach it. I think of a project that I'm doing, funded by Auckland Council at the moment, which is Hato networks, like a holistic wellbeing network. So we're
Mhm.
bringing together lots of different organisations and a particular focus being on young people. Um, what we've seen is, you bring all these people around the table who have a passion for young people and the well-being of young people. What we
Mhm.
decided about a year into the project was, shit, we really need to get some young people here. So we brought in these young people, um, and we had to keep reflecting, why are they actually here? What is the sort of output for them? Because they're giving their time. So when they walk away from meeting with us, what do they feel they've actually accomplished or given
Yeah.
or achieved? So is there a tangible output? Some people would argue it's a big part of young person engagement is recognition, reward, that sort of thing. And that's maybe quite a traditional way of looking at it, potentially. I know that in some of our St John Youth program, for example, we have a big emphasis on recognising what people do. So young people can earn badges and they earn certificates and things like that. Um, that's part of offering having a structured offering, I suppose.
Mhm.
It depends on the young person, right? And so we attract in St John a different type of young person maybe than does this project I'm doing with the council. They're quite different types of young people. Um, so you have to think about that diversity of the people you're serving as well, and
Yeah.
holding those young people at the centre, and holding your why at the centre, and kind of working it out together, I think. So it's a bit of a wishy-washy um, answer
Yeah.
there, but you know, yeah, it comes back to remembering your why, having the young people at the table,
Yeah.
um, and yeah, and reflecting throughout. Um, but as I say, it's so dependent on the context. I'd be happy to talk to anyone afterwards about their particular
Yeah.
context and what they're looking to do.
I think a lot of it comes down to when, like a lot of organisations that I speak to as well, they'll speak about having more of an ageing sort of demographic of volunteers and wanting to safeguard
Mhm.
their organisation, moving forward. And we know that this, I suppose, life and our lifestyle and how we engage with certain things is much different than it was 50 years ago or however long
Mm.
ago. And there's this concept of being, I suppose, time poor because we all live
Mhm.
such busy lives. And I think um, some people might say it's just not as much of a priority, but maybe it's because, partly we haven't adapted to the point where we can engage them in the way that we want to, in the way that suits their lifestyle. So talking about time, how do you think we can design volunteer experiences that work around those real life constraints that maybe weren't there, 20, 30, 40 years ago even?
Time is like my biggest enemy at the best of times, as it
Yeah,
happens. Yeah, because I think, well, my first reflection off the top of my head here is that we're not seeing a decrease in the amount of volunteering happening. Like if you look
yeah,
at the raw numbers, we're not seeing less people, or sorry, less a lesser amount of volunteering happening.
yeah.
What we're seeing in some places is that um, less people are carrying more of the load, or that the people who are giving their time in a volunteer capacity are doing it in different ways. Um,
Okay.
so in terms of managing that and navigating the time poorness of the population, yeah, it's a huge challenge, right? I think um, in the first instance, it's um, the diversity of offerings is something that can help there. Lots of people are always on, we're always connected online to what's happening. Um, and so maybe that's a terrible thing. Maybe it can be a good thing in some ways. I think of the volunteering that I do. I've stepped away from some of the formal and really structured volunteering to be able
Hmm.
to give my time to more kaupapa, more things happening, more projects in an episodic or project-based way. I think I
Hmm.
mentioned that before in the way that the types of volunteering are changing in urban centres. I'm probably
Yeah.
quite an urban person, unfortunately for me. Um, and so I give my time to committees and things that might only meet monthly, or things that you're able to do within your own time flexibly. That sort of
Hmm.
volunteering is, I'd argue, an answer to navigating that time poorness of
Yeah.
people. There's still a role for traditional programs, and there's absolutely still a role for the types of volunteering that were more accessible 20, 30 years ago, as you say,
Hmm.
because for some people they still work. For our older population, because we know our population's aging,
Hmm.
particularly in rural areas, that's still something that's really worth emphasising. In the
Yeah.
maybe this is overly sort of splitting it into two, but in the urban areas, not to keep coming back to that, um, offering different ways of accessing volunteering is a solution there. And I think
Hmm.
also digital access is a big thing. So lots of people, struggle to get to a meeting in person, or struggle to get to their local food bank or soup kitchen to give time there, but they might be able to give time online.
Yeah.
And so that might be mentoring someone else. For young people, mentoring is so valuable, right? To bring it back to young people,
Yeah.
in a professional development sense, in a leadership development sense. So that's something that can happen flexibly and aligned to people's diverse schedules. Um, but bearing in mind, as I say, that there is absolutely still a place for the structured programs. So I think in
Yeah.
terms of navigating the time challenge that we're faced with at the moment, it's about diversifying our options. So thinking about what as an organisation we need, and thinking how we can sort of split that into different approaches. So, for example, here at St John, if we're talking about programs, we have a structured youth program where people meet weekly, and so the volunteers give a couple of hours a week to run the youth division. Um, for people who might struggle to access that because of their time commitment, we have options for online participation, and we have events, and so there's different options for people to give their time but
Yeah.
it's still for the same program. So they're still meeting the same community need. They're still getting that same sense of belonging to the same community, but they're able to do it in different ways.
Yeah, and I wonder if there's what we've definitely noticed here at Rosterfy is that I think there's something in people often do have the time, but we need to make it easier for them to find the right kind of opportunity for them. So, for
Mm.
example, when we went live with the British Heart Foundation, they found that they were getting 125% more out of their existing cohort of volunteers just because they had a centralized place, whether it was our app or our portal, to find other opportunities that were available. So you had some volunteers that were at one shop and they were like, well, actually, I'm available at 4 p.m. on a Friday too, and that shop's around the corner. I can jump in there as well. And they just
Mm.
actually weren't aware of actually what was available, and it wasn't easy for them to access it. So I think that ease of accessibility and actually, uh, allowing volunteers to not making it so hard for them to find out how they can get
Mm.
involved with you and really opening it up can be really helpful for those people that feel like they're time poor as well. Because if you've got a last minute couple of hours, you'll just book something in and say, yeah, I'm happy to give
Yeah.
that time.
Oh, and you're so right there, Kelsey, because again, though, that's there are challenges right around the digital infrastructure required to make some of that possible. There's a
Yeah,
couple of examples I can think of where through that Hato network project that I support with, um, we're building a directory of places that people can go to for support with Hato well-being. Um,
yeah,
the investment required to even make a digital platform to enable that is
yeah,
kind of significant, right?
yeah,
And then even platforms for large organizations like Hatuhuni St. John, we've got over 10,000 people in the organization.
yeah,
We're a significant in terms of size, organization, and scope, but even we struggle to find the resource to get a good digital platform together, right? So there's just
absolutely.
it
Yeah,
becomes a challenge, and it's a resourcing and a funding issue. But
yeah,
this, in many instances, it's worth that investment. And moving forward, I think, like you say, for accessibility purposes, for connectivity purposes, it's going to be
yeah.
all the more important.
And I think if you can look at how, I mean, something like Rosterfy is one example of how we can automate that end to end and reduce the admin that the teams are doing so significantly. It actually gives your teams a chance to get back in the community and ask these important questions and figure out what people want, rather than
Mm,
spending their time trying to find people for different opportunities or fill things just because we haven't actually put it in front of them to say, hey, we've got these available, who can give their time. So I definitely think you're right. It often feels like a really heavy investment up front, but long term, just digitizing it and getting out of the muck, your team out of the muck and the weeds of trying to do the
yeah.
day to day stuff can really help to support your mission ongoing. How do you think organizations can be more culturally responsive, especially when working? Obviously, we spoke before about some of these multicultural communities, and if we specifically speak about maybe multi and ethnic communities, culturally responsiveness in there. What are your thoughts on that?
I know that we're limited for time, and
Yes.
I'm
Please,
studying.
I'm just saying, please drop any questions as we go in the question box, and we can answer them as we go as well, so we don't miss anybody. But carry on, Nate.
Cool. Well, just thinking because we are limited for time, I'm not going to try and list off like a golden list of three things you can do or something like that,
Yeah,
because either you can reach out to your connections or you can find that online. Maybe I think it might be more useful if I give a couple of examples from my own experience.
absolutely.
And one's going to be a failed example, being really blunt here, and one's going to be a really great, successful example. And maybe there's some comparisons or some reflections, insights to be taken from each of those. One of them comes from a project, both Hatuhuni St. John projects, so nobody's net failing or succeeding here, a good and a bad. One project was in a central Auckland suburb where
Mm-hmm.
we looked at starting a volunteer group in partnership with a government agency um, specifically for migrant and refugee whānau and community.
Mm-hmm.
There were a couple of ways we went wrong, so I'll focus on those before I talk about the good, because we know that we were doing it for the right reason, but the way that we approached it needed reflection. This was a couple of years ago now. Um, we didn't really co-design it with the community. That was
Right.
it. We knew that we had these people who were really passionate and keen, and we went and met with this local community in a big group of migrant and refugee whānau, most of them refugee. We had great people who wanted to take the lead from the community to do it, and so we thought that's great because we need, the community delivering to their community and to their whānau, because that's going to be more successful.
Mm-hmm.
But where it fell flat was that, as I say, we hadn't co-designed it, so we hadn't given the people taking the lead from the community the resource and the support to do it themselves, if that makes sense. So we'd gone in for an initial 4 or 5 meetings with this community. We'd offered them the training, but we'd done it in a way that fit our standard procedures. So
Yeah.
they had to come to our courses. Yes, we'd gone and met with them a handful of times, but after that, I didn't have the capacity to keep meeting with them, and nor did the people actually running the project. So in the long run, it didn't really take off, and I was really disappointed by that. I compare that to a project called the Te Manawaroa First Responder. It's a trial project happening in the far north, Te Taitokerau, partnership with Auckland University of Technology and Hato St John, where we're rolling out a first responder model, first response model that's co-designed with rural hapori, Māori whānau in the rural area,
Mm-hmm.
led by project researchers and expert clinicians from our organisation and the university. What we've found is that it's taken off and it's working really well. We've got a great group of we're calling them Te Manawaroa first responders. So they're local people from a rural remote Māori, predominantly Māori community in the far north, for whom access to health has been wrought with barriers. What we
Yeah.
found was that actually putting the resource to them and allowing them to take some of the lead has helped it take off locally in that community. So we've put the resource in terms of the people there.
Mm-hmm.
We've given them training in a way that's responsive to cultural needs. So
Mm-hmm.
rather than delivering it or expecting them to access it in the way that just anyone would, we've said, we'll meet you where you're at, we'll come to you, and we'll deliver a course that's specifically for you. So we've changed the way parts of it are delivered. It's still going to meet all of the clinical requirements, all of the requirements in terms of the educational expectations, but it's done so in a slightly culturally different way,
Yeah.
in a way that's culturally responsive, I should say.
Just resonating a lot more with that community. It's making it
Absolutely, yeah.
part
Yeah.
of their own. Yeah. Great takeaway. It's a great one. Um, I might finish on this question. If you could redesign how volunteerism works in New Zealand from the ground up, what do you think it would look like? Huge question.
Oh my Lord, it's such a huge question. I think from the ground up, in a way, I hate that wording
Yeah.
because I think, as I said at the start, we know that a majority of New Zealanders, and it's likely the same for Australia, I'm going to take a stab
Hmm.
in the dark there, already volunteer. So we know that people
Yeah.
are committed to this, to this space. So from the ground up, I mean, at the ground level, there is that commitment. So what we need
Yeah.
to do is that sort of system level tweaking, not necessarily broad sweeping change, but to be able to meet people and to offer them opportunities to give their time in a way that works for them, which we've talked about in terms of that
Yeah.
flexibility of offerings, etc. So I think more than a redesign from the ground up, it's actually about harnessing the leadership we've already got,
Yeah.
harnessing that volunteer effort on the ground,
Hmm.
and the change is more in that resourcing and funding space,
Yeah.
more than anywhere else. That's an issue that we hear all the time, and I work in fundraising, so I know it, because I work it every day, but also in all of my volunteer kaupapa, resourcing and funding is a significant challenge. So that's probably where maybe fundamental change is needed, more
Okay.
so than the actual volunteer and community, sector, which I'd argue, has brilliant foundations and only needs better support. So yeah, we're on
Okay.
12:29. How are we doing for time, Kelsey?
Yes, we're doing well for time. I might move to the Q&A. I do have another question for you that I might wrap up on, unless anybody has any questions here for Nate. I feel like you've been so comprehensive in your answers, and I feel like I've learned so much from you already. So there may not be. I also just wanted to say I have a QR code on the screen as well for anyone who wants to scan just to learn a little bit more about Rosterfy as well. But if there's any questions, please pop them in the chat. We'll be wrapping up in a couple of minutes. Otherwise, there was a question I missed that was around maybe best practices that you have for maintaining and building a really strong volunteer community. Any sort of final sign-off notes around things you'd recommend to anyone who's listening?
Gosh, my final words of wisdom.
Final words of wisdom.
I'm going to say that it needs to come back to the analysis of the why. And I'm speaking as a fundraiser here because that's how you get money. But it's so very true for the community and voluntary sector more broadly, because when you're connected to your why and your community's why, that's where people can feel a connection to kaupapa, a connection to their cause, and therefore a connection to keep giving their time and to keep contributing, because I think I used the word making some tweaks before, the term tweaks. We can tweak the way that we offer things as time goes on, but fundamentally and at the very core of everything we're doing needs to be this connection to why. And if you're saving lives, then that's your why, right? And if you're educating, then that's your why. If you're, I don't know, there's so many different causes out there, but it's that connection that I think is absolutely fundamental to begin with.
And I liked how you said as well earlier on, it's not even just,
right.
It's not even just the overall why of like what your organization is trying to achieve, but it's also the other questions, like you were saying, why do we need young people involved? What's the why around that? Like, why are we involving them in this? And like consistently asking yourself why throughout all the decisions that you're making. I think it's a really, really lovely takeaway.
For sure. And then does it align to the people's whys and your organizational or your collective why? Back to both. Yeah. That's cool.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Nate, for your time today. Just flashing up as well, you've obviously got the QR code there, but here are some of my details here if you wish to reach out, and I can always connect you to Nate. I know he very generously offered to connect with anybody as well. I'm sure you'll be able to find him on LinkedIn. Otherwise, please feel free to reach out to me, and I can always connect you. But otherwise, mā te wā, everybody, and thank you so much for sharing your lunch break with us. As mentioned previously, we do host these Lunch and Learn webinars on the first Tuesday of each month. But I will also, Marion, if any of you joined our very first one of these, Marion Casey, who will be joining me in Auckland next month as well to host actually a workshop around reward and recognition. So if you are in Auckland, there's more details to come around that, but if you are in Auckland and you think that's something that would be of interest to you, please reach out as well. But otherwise, a big final thank you to Nate for your time today. After reading all of your involvements and things, I can really appreciate the 30 minutes you've given us today. And it was really insightful. And yeah, thank you so much. And and thank you everybody else for joining us.
Of course. Thank you, Kelsey. And I've just scribbled that down because I'm in Auckland as it happens, and I'll be there. Hopefully.
Amazing. Definitely. I'll send you the details. Thanks, everybody.
Kia ora no tātou. Thanks all. Talk soon.